Hello, and welcome to the Being Human podcast, where we explore what it means to truly be human, physically, mentally, and spiritually. We upload an episode of this podcast every single week to help you better your physical health, mental health, to experience this existence better, to help you achieve your goals, just overall improve your experience of this life and of this existence, which is what we're all looking for at the end of the day. So what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button. You do not want to miss any of these episodes. On this episode of the podcast, I sat down with the Busy Superhuman, Dr. Sara Pugh. Sara is a PhD. She has studied biophysics, genetics, molecular mechanisms extensively. She has been researching and working in human health for decades. Sara has a great approach to human health. Sara started off our conversation by acknowledging the shortcomings of modern medicine and how modern medicine today really is a business like any other industry, and how unfortunately that leads to limitations in advancements in not just the treatment of disease and health problems, but more importantly, the prevention of human disease and health problems. Sara went into a number of different areas that are key points of understanding and action if we are looking to free ourselves from disease, improve our health, or optimize our health, whatever it may be. Sara talked about carbs. Should we in the UK be eating carbohydrates such as fruit in the winter when naturally it's not growing in our environment? The only reason we're able to eat it is that we have access to it from a supermarket where it's been imported. We talked about the importance not just of food, but of water as well, how important water is, the concepts of structured water. I asked Sara about nicotine, whether it is in fact a super drug, and if it is in fact a super drug, how should you be taking it and what should you be aware of in terms of side effects, potential negative consequences of nicotine consumption. We also talked about peptides. I asked her about the potential side effects of peptides such as Ipamorelin, BPC-157, and again, Sara did a great job of pointing out the considerations you need to make before implementing or considering implementing something like peptides into your health protocols. I asked Sara how much we should be getting out into the sun during summer. And for people in this country that are fair-skinned and often burn, what should they be doing to try and make the most out of British summertime? We talked about vegan diets versus carnivore diets, cold exposure, a bit about saunas. She did a great job of going in depth and really explaining how these things work and how they benefit human health in a nuanced way. I do not doubt you will garner a great deal of knowledge and wisdom. Presuming you do find value, presuming you do enjoy the conversation, please hit that subscribe button. That is the best way you can help support Being Human. Please also share this video, hit thumbs up, drop a comment below, hit 5 stars if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, whatever the mechanisms are. Show some love, support the channel, be part of the community. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting Being Human. Your name on Instagram is the Busy Superhuman, and you're a PhD in molecular mechanisms and biophysics. If you could please just tell us, Sara, as like a layperson's explanation as to what it is you do, what's your background, and the purposes of your content online.
Okay, well, actually, my degree was in genetics and biochemistry, and then I did a PhD after that, which was in molecular mechanisms and biophysics. So with genetics, I think people sort of understand briefly what that might be, but there's lots of sort of issues with how much our genes really control our lives. Anyway, it's a lot more our environment. So the most important thing of all is that I think the genes are something like 1%, if that, and the environment's 99% or more. So we have a much bigger control over our health than biochemists or geneticists or people trying to sell you custom-made things for your genetics than you think. And then biochemistry would be sort of how biology works at a biochemical level, like processes in the body, focusing on molecules. And for lay people, it would be things like metabolism and macros and vitamins and supplements and medication and things like that. And then if we go into the biophysics of the body, this is where the problem lies, is there's a lot more to the biology of us than just biochemistry, that light is a massive driver of biology in a huge way. And this is sort of something we've known for a long time, but the science can be difficult to sort of bring to the public, just because we don't have the detectors or the funding yet to look at this. But also things like water is really important in our bodies, and we are sort of 70% water, or 99 molecules of water and one of a person, and that gets massively neglected as well, because people think water is just something they drink in a glass, but it can act as a battery in the body. It can carry information, and there's a lot more to it than we think. And it's actually quite simple, really, physics. It's just something we're taught physics in school, and it's like maths. It's the one of the hated subjects, so it sort of gets pushed aside. But fundamentally, physics runs biology. So that's sort of, in layperson's terms, my background. I left science because I then did a project on statins and heart cells, and I got very disillusioned with all of this, because I could see what was going on, as in they were saying, oh, here's money, can you just make some kind of project to say that statins are good, sort of in a very short sort of sentence. And but by then I already had questions about, well, I don't really understand why fat's demonized, and nobody could sort of give me a reason. And then I was disillusioned with the British Heart Foundation, because it's a business, not a charity. And if it was producing useful advice for us, then there wouldn't be any more heart attacks, but there are more than ever. And more young people are having heart disease, even people who are so-called being healthy by what, the standards of the media and the country are. So this was like in 2008. So I left, and I then went into movement, because I've always loved exercise, whether it's martial arts or soccer or weights or gymnastics or whatever. So I taught Pilates, but then that led me into other things like myofascial release, Bowen technique, hypnosis, and just working with actual people, not in a laboratory. So when you work with a human, that's when all the spirituality side comes in. And obviously hypnosis is very spiritual. Sorry. And this what I would say was in about 2012. Then I got back into sort of biochemistry, because people wanted to know about nutrition. And I already knew about ketogenic diets in, I think, 1999, because the Atkins diet had a resurge, and I found him a very interesting, clever man. Even though people laughed at him, he was one of sort of our geniuses. And he didn't die from a heart attack. He died he fell, just so people can clear that one up. So he was an interesting person for me to learn about fats and ketogenic diets early, because I had a variety of issues that nobody could solve, and that's how I got into ketogenic diets that long ago. But then in sort of 2013-14, it was really frowned upon, the high fat. The vegan movement hadn't really started fully then. It was more about the food pyramid. And again, people were just getting sicker and more depressed, and it was clearly there was a problem. And from working with people, everything works basically. And sometimes Pilates works for somebody. So another person, it might be taking up hiking. Somebody else, it might be doing a ketogenic diet. And there's just one thing that happens to work for them. But in general, you sort of need lots of things to work. And no matter what, there was always things I couldn't fix, like people and their sleep, people with persistent sort of mental health problems like depression and anxiety, even though they were doing everything right, like meditating, exercising regularly, eating a really sensible way of eating, they still got plagued with these problems. So I knew there was sort of something I didn't know, and it was sort of right under my nose all the time, because I did actually do lots of fluorescence to do with light when I worked at doing biophysics. I just hadn't put it together properly about circadian rhythms. So that's how I got into quantum biology, because it was through people like Dr. Cruz, who is a genius but can be really difficult to understand. But luckily, I was willing to trail through all his blogs. I mean, I don't understand them all, but I don't think anybody does. But to pull out stuff that could be used practically, but also things that can be explained to the general public, because that's a massive barrier. And that's why I tend to, if I'm going to work with people, I'll go for the light and the magnetism and the water and the nature and the exercise first, because there's so much nonsense around diet, and people are so emotionally attached to food, and we've constantly got pressure from doctors and the media to eat things that are terrible. So I sort of use that as a route in for talking to people, because nobody can say that going outside is bad for you. And we all agree there's a big vitamin D problem in the UK. And there are so many different aspects of what the sun does during the day. It produces different wavelengths of light, and these change or produce different levels of hormones and neurotransmitters. So for these people with mental health issues, the light is massively important. And once they started learning about seeing the sunrise, going out in the morning, blocking blue light in the evening, they were able to control their mood more and sleep. And then their problems went away. Then I got into sort of how water works in the body, because I think it's really important for understanding how ketogenic diets and carnivore diets work, because when we use fat as a fuel, our mitochondria produce more water, and water is what makes our bodies go around. From sort of how circulation works, the brain contains the most water, and it's not water in a glass, it's the exclusion zone water, the fourth phase, the one that's arranged itself in hexagons. And this water has structure, and it charge separates, so it means protons and electrons can flow or move. So instantly this provides sort of semiconduction or sort of electricity in the body, as well as a way for information to be transferred through the body. Because I did a lot of neurology when I was teaching movement, and the quickness in which we move and the dexterity and the intricacy, it's just the nervous system's too slow. And same with our mood and how long it takes for a synapse or a neuron to actually make a neurotransmitter, and for it to cross the synapse and deliver its information, it's just too slow. There had to be something else quicker in the body. And it's not me just speculating. Dr. Gilbert Ling proved this a long time ago, theoretically. And if anybody thinks that he made that up, all of NMR, which is nuclear magnetic resonance, which is basically looking at how water behaves in people or in test tubes, is all based on Gilbert Ling's theory. So he had to be right, otherwise we wouldn't have these sophisticated imaging devices. And people completely forget that the way NMR works, if you go to have a scan because you think you've herniated a disc, or you have a CT scan, it's basically just looking, or even a scan looking for sort of tumours. It's basically all about how water is arranging itself and behaving, because there's an isotope called deuterium, and it's all a water effect. And if you asked any doctor, oh, how does the NMR work, they wouldn't be able to tell you, and they'd laugh at you if you said it's all water based. So water is like hugely important, because water chemistry is massively complicated in theory, but it's very simple of how to get more water yourself, and how to protect your water, and how to not become dehydrated at a metabolic level. Because again, I know you're interested in sports, so I think I looked at your Instagram and saw jiu-jitsu and martial arts and bodybuilding. So obviously water in terms of movement and fascia and injuries and injury healing is massively important, and it gets very neglected. And again, collagen and how that works and produces electrons, and how we move is sort of pivotal for people who suffer from, say, chronic pain, because there are lots of reasons people have chronic pain, but one of them is our fascial problems, and also just simply aging, that while your fascia is still nice and wet and slippery and makes plenty of electrons, you can still do all of these things that, movement. And I still do gymnastics, and I'm sort of nearly 47 now. So I don't have this idea that, oh, you get too old and you can't do stuff anymore. And everybody agrees that as someone gets older, they tend to dry out, but they don't sort of realize that that's a water effect. And then magnetism is kind of the thing which confuses people a lot. But our mitochondria are a magnet in a way, because there's an ATPase that spins, and that makes ATP. Our heart is a giant magnetic device, because it's got all that iron, that blood in it, all that DHA, and it's a sort of vortexing hydraulic ram. So it's not a pump. It's the blood itself pushes itself around by electrostatic propulsion. But the heart's obviously really important. We could go in for ages about why the heart's not a pump, but this is why I have sort of massive issues with cardiology and all of the stuff about statins and cholesterol, because they don't even know what the heart is. So they don't really, it just enrages me on a deep level when they start talking about cholesterol and this drum has been being beaten since sort of 1950s with Ansel Keys, and it's like, well, if you don't even know how the heart works, how can I possibly accept anything that you're going to say about saturated fat and all of this? And then with magnetism, I think for lay people, I would say that grounding used to be thought of something that hippies and yoga teachers do, but it's getting sort of much more popular now. And when you're not connected with the earth, you can't draw electrons from the earth. So it's actually a magnetic effect of how we draw electrons in from the earth. And with electrons, just in simple terms, they have a negative charge and they act sort of like money in the body. So the more electrons we have, the more complexity we have, as in that's why in a human we've got lots of molecules that carry lots of electrons, because hemoglobin's got more electrons than chlorophyll, and we've got melanin that can pop out more electrons. Our water battery, our EZ water, pops out electrons. So in simple terms, the more electrons you've got, the less inflammation you'll have. And that's, again, something that's really important for just general health, even for people who are new to all of this, that if you can get inflammation down, that's not just about, feeling stiff. We've got neuroinflammation, which can cause depression. And then we've got inflammation in blood vessels, which, again, is not just about cardiovascular problems. The health of an organ is dictated by how good its blood supply is. So we obviously want healthy blood vessels as well. And even if there's not huge amounts of studies on grounding, a lot of the strongest ones are those studies where they show when people are grounded, their blood cells tend not to clump together as much. So that means the flow in the blood is better the more grounded you are. And even to somebody who's a lay person, having better blood flow to all your organs, to your brain, to flush things out, to get blood to the muscles is obviously going to be a good thing. And then the other part about being grounded is that there's a lot of things in life that steal our electrons. So in some ways, you can just think about how can I get the most electrons? So I mentioned fat being a good supply of electrons. DHA is as well. That comes from seafood. It's an omega-3. That brings electrons in. Then when you move, collagen will produce electrons. If you go outside in the red light, the sun produces red light all the time. That's going to expand your exclusion zone. And like I said before, the water in that is special and it can pop out an electron. So that's more electrons again. Tech steals our electrons because it shrinks the water and it annoys the mitochondria. So they aren't as efficient and they make more free radicals and less water. And then EMFs do all sorts of other things as well. But in sort of simple terms, they just dry us out. And for lay people, you can just say, well, when you cook things in a microwave, it's not quite the same as cooking it in another way. It's just drier and tougher. That's sort of where I'm sort of at with explaining to anybody in sort of lay terms why magnetism, grounding, light, water are important, and just to get them sort of interested. And it's all about, I think, same with you, being interested in lots of aspects of health. Everything is about trying to solve a problem. Everything I buy to do with my quantum equipment, or it's because I'm trying to solve a problem. If I want to learn something or do a course, it's because I've got a problem. So I think the more tools you've got in your toolbox for problem solving, the better. And that's why I tend to focus on physics now, because it's controls biology. It's much harder to argue with. The maths behind how physics works, we've got plenty of that. And there are so many flaws in research science and current paradigms of biology. There has to be something else that's above this. So I just think that's sort of my approach to everything in a sort of nutshell. Sorry, it was quite a long answer.
No, not at all. I think you did a great job there of giving us a good comprehensive overview of everything you're about. And I'd like to go into a few of those different elements: the water, carb intake, light, us being electrical beings, and get some actionable protocols for people that they can use every day to improve their health. But just to touch on a couple of principles that you highlighted there, which I think are really important. Number one, modern medicine, mainstream medicine, obviously it has been so helpful for humanity as a whole. No one can deny it has been incredibly beneficial in many ways. But as well, I think more and more people today are realizing how it is failing people in other ways. And the fact is, something like the NHS is still a business. Pharmaceutical companies are absolutely businesses. And now we're at the point where the publication of scientific studies has very much become a business. So it is important to not just trust in what your doctor says, what this publication, what this study says. It's very important to go into the science. And as you said as well, this is something that I think not many people at all understand, which is our health is not just to do with biology. People think, oh, biology, when it comes to human health, when it comes to us, biology provides us with all the answers. Whereas, the reason for the separation of science into physics, chemistry, and biology is because it scales. The laws of physics set the stage for all biological mechanisms to occur. And I think that's something that people don't understand. I think you're doing a great job of highlighting to people that our physical environment, the laws of physics have a massive impact, not just a massive impact, they're the whole reason why we're here. And because of that, we have to pay due attention to physics if we really want to understand how our biology works. So to go into some of those elements and protocols you talked about, let's start with the nutrition side of things. Carbs, fats. What is the story with carbs, and how do the seasons that we're currently in, whether we're in winter, whether we're in summer, how does that affect how we should view our intake of carbs and fats? So in the winter in the UK, should we be taking in carbs when traditionally we wouldn't be eating fruits in this part of the world during winter?
Yeah, the thing is, the way that the mitochondria work and a protein called mTOR and how the electrons go down the electron transport chain, they're all UVA, UV light is active, and it all pivots on how much UV light there is, and we don't really have any in the winter. And if you want to grow plants of any kind, you need sunlight, and they won't grow without UVA. And then with photosynthesis, without overcomplicating it, it's just the sunlight, and gets the plant basically uses sunlight to power chemical reactions. It's and then makes glucose. So that's how the carb got here, and that's a light dependent process. And it's basically the information carried in those carbs that are grown, because electrons carry information, because that's how a lot of it all works. All electrons are identical until you put information in them, which will be light. So that would be talking about Einstein's photoelectric effect. So these carbs that have been grown in, say, summer, the information that they carry matches. Say if I'm growing apples in my garden, we both live in the same place. So I do eat my own apples sometimes in summer, because I think it carries exactly the right information. So my mitochondria are expecting something like an apple, because it knows if I'm grounded and I'm seeing the sunrise regularly and outside a lot, the inside of me, my biology, has got information from the outside, so it knows what to expect. And a lot of how the brain works, the brain is constantly trying to future pace. It wants to know what's going to happen next. So it wants to predict, or how dangerous might this be? Are we going to survive? So a lot of it's based on anticipation or prediction. So my mitochondria will predict that if it's summer, that there's a chance that there would be fruit and things growing. And then if I eat my own apples, it expected that. And the quantum information carried within the apple matches what the mitochondria are expecting. So they're happy, because the thing about mitochondria is they make water, they make light, they make carbon dioxide, they make ATP, but they also make free radicals. So if you do things to confuse them or upset them, for example, being on your phone all day or eating processed food, because that carries goodness knows what horrible information from being in a factory, you're providing confusing information to quantum level. And confusion in physics, or chaos, is inflammation. So it can be inflammatory on a sort of quantum mechanics level to eat fruit when we shouldn't, because our mitochondria are not expecting it. So that's sort of the quantum reason for not eating fruit. The other reason is, if we just look at our ancestors, because that's a very interesting thing, all the things our ancestors knew and did, because they, again, on things like water and dowsing and the more metaphysical side, they were the experts at that, and then we seem to have forgotten. They couldn't have eaten fruit and things in winter because it just simply wasn't there. So we've just got used to not doing it because we couldn't. So particularly in this area of the world, I mean, if people have lived at the equator forever, then that's a different scenario because the fruit grows there at more often. It doesn't grow all the time, but there's more of it. So, it's less confusing for people who live in, I don't know, El Salvador or in equatorial Africa to eat fruit because it's supposed to be there. Whereas for us in the UK, just because we can eat it, it doesn't mean we shouldn't. We should, because the idea is with light, the light information that we get from the sun on our skin and in our eyes should match. That's why sort of too much clothes can be a problem, because the skin is not providing the proper information. But then we also want the food that we eat to provide the correct sort of information as well, because fundamentally matter is just energy or light slowed down. As hard as that might be for people to sort of grasp, if you look into any sort of physics or neurology book, that's what it is. So that's sort of the quantum reason for avoiding those kind of carbs in winter, just because we simply wouldn't have them. I have a zero tolerance towards things that come out of factories, I'm afraid, and I just think it's much better. If I'm working with clients, I'd rather they ate, a potato or an apple, even if it's in winter, than processed food, because there's not just the bad quantum information. There's the seed oils, there's the deuterium. It's just a recipe for bad health on multiple levels. And you can just destroy any argument using physics of why processed food's awful, regardless of what dietitians and the bros online want to tell you that it's okay as long as it's in your calorie allowance. I completely disagree, I'm afraid. Whereas when it comes to things that are actually a food, that's when there's a bit more wiggle room. But really, we shouldn't. Again, with food, the healthier the person, if they get lots of light and they're healthy, they're younger, their mitochondria have less heteroplasmy, they're more tolerant to people eating sort of things they shouldn't, because you can get away with it. It's just more as you get older, you can't, but then people just blame something else. So it can't be me eating cereal for breakfast because I've done that all my life, but they didn't realize, like 1,000 cuts is what kills you. So that's kind of with carbs, there's lots of interesting things to do with sort of hormones, particularly in women over 40, about how it can be useful at certain times in moderation to help with thyroid hormone and progesterone. Although there are people that are perfectly happy being in ketosis all the time, and to them the idea of eating something like that, their bodies just say no, and that's fine. But there are other people where it can be beneficial, but you need to time it properly. You can't just think, oh, I'll have a pizza to help my leptin or my hormones. You want to actually choose proper food in a sort of sensible amount to help with the hormones. And I've definitely noticed this thing seems to affect women more than men, but again, we are sort of different. So that's my view on carbs. I mean, there's so many different sorts. When it comes to choosing a carb, because I know some people do eat them, you just want something that's not inflammatory, because nightshade vegetables can be a massive problem for people who've got other issues, or people who've got high inflammation, like high HSCRP and low vitamin D. Those people shouldn't be eating nightshades because they're already, their bodies are under pressure. And just for UK listeners, those are sort of two really easy labs that you should be able to get from your doctor. And if not, that you can buy them, and it's not very expensive. But again, those people shouldn't be eating any kind of inflammatory vegetable or plant produce, because unfortunately the plants just tend to be more inflammatory. The seeds definitely don't want us to eat them because that's the plant's baby. And then things like nuts, I mean, they have got useful things in them, but they've got tons of phytates and oxalates and stuff, and they'll bind and steal the minerals. So that's my sort of view, because there are some people who don't want to even attempt keto or carnivore because the idea of the restriction puts them off. Whereas sometimes if you just let people go into it gradually by themselves. They'll think, oh, every time I eat these carbs, I do really well with my weight loss, and then I eat the carbs, but then I seem to not be able to stop for 2 weeks, and they'll kind of learn for themselves, and maybe it's not a good idea. Or people who say, oh, I love nuts, and then run into, they can't quite get rid of their gut issue. They'll sometimes get rid of it, the nuts themselves, without me having to keep harassing them, and they'll sort of drift into something less inflammatory by themselves. So that's how I've kind of approached it, because people just get so angry and upset about food on the internet. I try not to talk about it because, like you said, there are so many other things we can do to help improve our redox or our constitution, whatever you want to call, or our circadian rhythm or our sleep, and that makes us more resilient and stronger. So I just go down, sort of that route, because there are sort of less people talking about it. So it's interesting to people who've heard enough about food. So what are your thoughts? I think you said you were a carnivore.
So I never actually went full carnivore, but a couple of years ago, it was 2021, the start of 2021, I bought into veganuary. So I love animals, and that was my driver for trying veganism. I thought, I'm going to see how it goes, because I really like animals, and I've realized, factory farming, what animals have to go through, the meat that's put in front of you on your table, if it's come from a supermarket or if it's come from a restaurant, then the animal's gone through complete torture to get there. So that was my motivation for trying veganism. And I was vegan for 6 months. And I have to admit, it's not that I felt bad on it. I felt pretty fine, actually. I think knowing what I know, I think if I'd persisted with it for long enough, say 6 years as opposed to 6 months, I think I probably would have started seeing deleterious effects. But just intuitively, I wanted to start eating meat again. I ate it once, and then I just started eating it again every single day. And then I think it was through a few people on Instagram, I started hearing more about this animal-based way of eating. And as you spoke about, the inflammation that can be caused from vegetables. And like I said before, I've got to admit, it's not that I felt any negative effects from eating vegetables, but I thought, I'll give this animal-based thing a go. I'm really enjoying eating meat again. I'm doing it as ethically as I can. I'm getting it from farm shops where, the meat's grass-fed, the chickens are properly free-range, pasture-raised, that kind of thing. So I really went heavily into that. Lots of steak, started eating raw liver, drinking raw milk, raw egg yolks, all of that stuff, and eating a lot of fruit as well. And then the vegetables intuitively kind of slipped to the wayside. I just wasn't craving them, didn't feel as though I needed them. And I ate pretty heavily animal-based for about a year, and I put on so much muscle, like my libido went through the roof. It's not that I felt bad on a vegan diet, but I felt almost superhuman eating animal-based. And then since then, I've started to try and incorporate more vegetables back in. I still don't eat that many, but I have to say I feel pretty great regardless. So yeah, that's where I'm at. But then to speak on something that I've found the past 3 months during this winter, I've just intuitively found I don't want to eat as much fruit in the winter. I just realized I wasn't craving it as much. And again, like you said, you can tell people these things, but at the end of the day, the best way to go about it is to listen to your own intuition. And the thing, something that I think you highlighted really well, is if you're eating all this processed food that's come from a factory, your body and brain's got so much chaos and misinformation, so to speak, that your intuition is just going to be completely blunted. So you've got to be eating a disciplined, healthy diet, eating real foods in order for your intuition to do its work. But I think once you're there, then your body will kind of tell you, okay, you don't actually want as many carbs throughout the winter, and it will tell you that through cravings. And that's what I found this past winter. I haven't really eaten much fruit at all, but I'm pretty sure in the summer, once all the bushes start fruiting and blossoming, that I'll be craving strawberries, blackberries, all these things that are going to be naturally abundant for us in our environment. So yeah, I really agree. I think people should listen to their intuition, but the first step of listening to your intuition is getting rid of all that noise, and that means getting rid of that processed food, getting rid of all that food that's made in a factory. That it really is the first step, I think, when it comes to your nutrition. segueing now.
Definitely, you've highlighted lots of important things there, because a lot of stuff to do with anxiety and depression and ADHD is the more confusing information you give your brain, the more it's got to do. The same with brain fog. Like if it's in terms of movement, if you do bad movement or have got some joints that are a bit stiff, that's confusing for your brain because you can't even control yourself properly. And then with eyes and vestibular systems, if they're off kilter, that's even more for the brain to try and process. But then if you're feeding it weird food, it's like, what on earth's this? And it has to try and process that. And we've only got so much processing power in the day of decision making and stuff like that. So sometimes with willpower or whatever, it's not there's somebody's a bad person. It's just their brain's that busy trying to decipher all this confusing information. And also to add to that, if you just stay inside all the time and you never go outside or you don't see the sunrise, your body clocks are all over the place now. So that's more confusion. And then if you never ground, your brain doesn't know really where you are on the planet. So that's another recipe for anxiety, because like I was saying, the brain always wants to make predictions. So the more information that's right that you give it, the happier it is because it feels safer. And again, a lot of anxiety sort of pivots around fear that might happen in the future. So there's lots of ways to sort of unpick how all of this might work and sort of present it in a way to explain to, say, lay people, or it does not necessarily lay people or people who are just interested in why does this work, because I'm very much, okay, this works, but then how and why does it not work sometimes? And I agree with you about the veganism. I've tried it as well, and because as long as I eat actual food, I'm fine with anything with it, really. So I and also if you have your own allotment and fruit trees and you pick fruit and vegetables and eat them within sort of 7 or 8 hours and they're totally fresh, you get a whole different bonus because it's still got the electrons. So you get, and it's got structured water and it's completely fresh. So there is a lot of value in just picking strawberries and blackberries and eating them while you're doing it, or picking your own apples or having an allotment, because it's different vegetables. It's kind of vegetables that have been reared properly. So therefore, they're better for us. And the same with the animals. The crueler you are to the animal, the worse the meat is. So there's sort of like a karma effect in all of this, that we get punished by treating our vegetables badly because they don't have much nutrients in them and they're more inflammatory because they were stressed in the fields or covered in pesticides. And then the same with the animals, that if they've had a nice life and been loved and allowed to roam around the fields, it just produces better quality meat. Whereas if it's animals that have been pumped full of drugs and transported all over the world and reared in a horrible way, there's definitely quantum information about not just the nutritional information that's worse, but there's also the sort of consciousness side of all this that people like Rupert Sheldrake talk about morphic fields, or I've started talking a lot about the ether and our biofields. I think if you treat your food nicely, it performs better for you. And it might sound outlandish to people, but sometimes when you sit down and think about it, of all the food you've eaten, it's always the freshest that you just feel great after. And even if you do eat, say, something that looks healthy, sort of fruits, I was reading something about how old fruit in the UK can be, and sometimes an apple can be 6 months old and it's still on the shelf. So goodness knows what's going on in that sort of nutrition wise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, that's a pretty staggering fact. It makes you wonder what's gone into that apple to enable it to stay fresh for 6 months on a shelf. But yeah, again, I can't remember what I was going to say. I lost my trail of thought there. Yeah, even for people that don't care about animals, because some people genuinely don't, look at it from the selfish point of view.
Yeah.
An animal that's gone through torture is going to do your body torture, which might sound dramatic, but the nutritional profile between a cow that's been outside under the sun, ate grass its entire life on its natural diet, been around a community, the meat's not going to be stressed, it's not going to be tainted, it's going to be, the content of the fat in the meat's going to be so much healthier compared to a cow that's been shoved inside a pitch black box for its whole life, not had any movement or any exercise, been pumped full of steroids and not pesticides, sorry, but all kinds of hormones, antibiotics. These all taint the meat and will taint the nutritional profile of it. So even if you don't want to pay attention to the animal welfare side of it, think about how that is then going to impact your own health. And I think ultimately, under the day, the way we're wired, our first and foremost interest for humans is usually ourselves, as it is for any species. So if you need to look at it from that self-interest point of view, it's still going to be in your benefit to eat real foods and eat foods that have been that are from animals that have been raised in their natural environments, and animals that are happy and have lived full, proper lives. You spoke about structured water a few times. I've seen a few companies now advertising structured water. I think smart water might even be structured water, which has been around for quite a while now. Is that just marketing hype? Can you drink structured water from a bottle and gain an extra benefit from it? Or is that just kind of a marketing hype?
Well, if we think about how, say with water, before we had sort of Yorkshire water and the waterworks, we would have to gather it from a well or a river, and it had been outside, and there's a lot to be said about if you vortex water, you can structure it because it's basically putting energy into it. So that's why the heart is a vortexer. It performs special motions on the blood to effectively sort of energize it using a vortex. And this is not, my imagination. There are people who've been studying this. I think it even goes back, 300 or 400 years, about how there's sort of energy in water, and you can make vortexing or structuring devices. And the name of the inventor has slipped me for the moment, but you can still buy his device. It's like some kind of copper toroidal ring, and you can just put it and you run your water through, and it'll vortex it for you like a river would. So what would have happened, that water our ancestors drank would have had minerals in it, and it would have been outside. So sunlight can structure water. Dr. Gerald Pollack showed this before. So it's making these sort of three-dimensional structures, and again the hexagons where electron can pop out. So what's happened is that when we pushed water through pipes and treated it with whatever we need to treat it with, we effectively make what we'd call dead water or non-coherent water. And the water that's in the tap, it doesn't not only contain sort of fluoride and other unwanted things that shouldn't be there, it's also lost its coherence, so it doesn't carry as much life or energy. But this doesn't mean you have to go and buy structured water. Or all you can do is you can put your water in a glass, like I just put it in a jug, and just put it outside in the sun, and that's the sunlight's going to restructure your water. And then there are things like analemma wands, which I don't fully understand the physics. I haven't looked into it properly, where you can stir it and vortex it, and there is a science behind that. I'll have to look into it in more detail. But then there are actual vortexing devices that you can run the water through to sort of re-energize it again. It's like making your own river in your own kitchen that's not messy. And so no, I wouldn't buy any structured water. And also the way that optics work, plastics and glass tend to block certain wavelengths of light. So it is better to just put your jar outside or on a windowsill for 10 minutes with a lid off, and then the light definitely got into the top. A bit will get through the glass. It's normally the near infrared and UV that gets blocked by glass. So I would say if they're trying to sell you structured water, I wouldn't buy it, because that's the other thing I'm always into, is calling out nonsense. Because as much as somebody creates a new field, say quantum biology, there are always people that are going to start inventing EMF harmonizers and chakra water, and unfortunately people sort of, for whatever reason, find this very interesting and it resonates with them, so they buy it, and they probably feel better because they believed in it. So you've got the placebo effect on top. So in terms of what I tell people to do, I just say to make your own structured water. So I always distill my water, just because that gets everything out. Then I remineralize, and there's lots of sort of natural sea salts, and I use sometimes some magnesium sulfate, particular minerals that I want, some potassium citrate, some magnesium, because the minerals help the water to structure, because they influence the properties of light in the body and in the water. And I just find it just tastes nice as well if I make my own. Once you've made distilled water and then remineralized it to your palate, it's really hard to drink other water, because it tastes either metallic or sharp or dry, and it's not a faff at all. It's just something you just do. And I think it's like one of these fundamentals, that drinking clean water is so foundational to human health, yet we completely neglect it.
Yeah, again, in terms of the mainstream school of thought on what we put into our bodies, there's so much focus on nutrition, and even that is so skewed because you've got people saying it doesn't really matter what you eat so long as you're in your calories and you've had enough protein. But then the other elements of it is, before food, water is like our primary life source. Water's the main priority. You could go 40 days without food potentially. You can't go more than a week without water, and we pay so little attention to it. Most of the research that I've done has been on the fluoride contamination, heavy metal contamination. But you've introduced me to the whole principle of structured water as well. It's not just about that; it's about the formation of the water. And even when we get spring water in a bottle, there's so many things that go into that. Obviously, the fact that it's in a plastic bottle, you get the microplastics, but as well, it's not like just because it's spring water, we're not getting the same effect. It's not the same water we would be drinking if we just, put a cup underneath a waterfall, underneath a river, and drank it straight from the source like that. So yeah, that's a very important distinction.
But I also think it's important for people who are addicted to like cola and squash and tea because it's got a taste. If you can make delicious tasting water, all of that tends to go away because it's all back to you can't, it's hard to say to people, oh, stop drinking Diet Coke. Oh, but I don't like it's water's boring. And I do understand that, but I just think, well, you've not tried my water. And it's one of those things, if you can get people to find a liquid that they find really satisfying. And I love my water, and I've just got, I don't dislike, sodas and stuff. I just don't drink them anymore because I like my water more. So I'm perfectly happy with my water. But it's the same with other people, that once you find a delicious drink, what's the point of bothering with the synthetic ones? And they tend to just stop it by themselves. Because I think a lot of with working with people is if you tell them to do something, their inner children inside them rebel against you. Whereas if it's an idea they come round to by themselves, because they found a nicer drink like the water, and just gradually just stopped drinking squash or fruit juice or whatever, or even giving it to their children. And I think that's really important. If children were taught to really like water because they were given really tasty water early, they'd have much less interest in wanting sort of dopamine spiking, tasty, crazy flavored drinks, which there are loads around. And again, it's just not always the person. It's sometimes there isn't an alternative. And I do understand what they're saying. And I do understand that water out of the tap can be really horrible in certain areas. And, some men I know say, oh, I'm not drinking mineral water out of a bottle. That's girly. And I agree with that. And also when it comes to proper hydration, say for working out, the whole electrolytes thing and all of the rubbish that people sell in tubs and sachets just drives me insane. It's like, just distill your own water, go and buy a collection of natural minerals. They're really cheap. They'll last you months and months and months. And there's the most perfect drink for you in your workout and afterwards. And it's not got any dirty flavorings or weird sweeteners. And you made it, so all about it. So I think that the water thing, there's sort of so many levels, and it's so simple. It's one of the big, massive, low-hanging fruits. And also water distillers are really cheap because for people on budgets or worried about, cost of living, sometimes certain other equipment can be really out of their remit. But a distiller, you can get one for £100. And sometimes the expensive ones are only more expensive because they're twice the size. They're not better.
Yeah, no, another really good point. You hear a lot of people today saying, oh, I can't drink water, it's boring, or I don't like the taste of it. And to be honest, I've always thought, what are you talking about? It's water, just suck it up and drink it. You're not supposed to be drinking water for pleasure. You're drinking water because it's essential. But that's a good point. Who can blame them? Because a lot of water tastes awful, especially when it's from the tap. So, yeah, if drinking water really is that difficult for you because you just can't stand the taste, then make your own water.
But also then if it's parents saying that, with sometimes it's whether it's genetics or morphic fields or just being indoctrinated, then the kids will say, oh, water's nasty, I don't want to drink water. And then you've now got a generation of squash and pop drinkers, because and also it is much harder to retrain palates. When the earlier people start doing this, the harder it is to stop it. So if you can get the kids still liking water, then, you've done well. But if they start being into sort of colas and pops at 5 and 6, it's going to be really hard later to undo that. But obviously it's like you said, it's possible. I'm like you, it's just, suck it up. But then other people are not like that. They need some, they want something nice.
A hot topic in the health space at the moment is nicotine. I think this is for a few reasons. I think one of them is the popularity of Huberman, and Huberman did an episode on nicotine last year, I think it was, touting the benefits of it, particularly in, I know he doesn't like this term, but a biohacking sense, in terms of how good a stimulant it can be for productivity. What's your stance on nicotine? Is it actually the super nutrient that people are calling it at the moment? Or again, is that a bit of marketing hype that's been induced in from companies selling it?
All right. Yes, as much as with supplements, because I've been interested in them for like 20 years and I don't really use anymore. With nicotine, that's definitely, there's a lot to that because, first of all, if somebody's got a bad parasympathetic nervous system, but their mitochondria are okay, because nicotine is it is in the nightshade family. So there are people who are going to have a bad reaction. So they'll try it and hate it. That's the end of that for them. And they need to go and fix their mitochondria and come back to it. Whereas if somebody's got a bad sympathetic, they've got say a problem with their parasympathetic nervous system, like they tend to be a bit more stressed or it's overactive, because nicotine works, the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors are in the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. So it can be really helpful for people who feel crap because they've got a bad, it's like the biology of the nervous system. Because some people, there's a reason, like they've got trauma, and other people, it's just there's some biological reason their parasympathetic nervous system and GABA and all of those sort of that side of the nervous system are off. So sometimes it can be used, say if somebody says I feel crap all the time and I don't know why, if they use nicotine, it can tell you whether it's okay, is it mitochondria or is it like a nervous system thing. Then secondly, nicotine, like melatonin and cold thermogenesis, can squash the electron transport chain. So it compresses the respiratory proteins in the mitochondria. So that means the electrons can go down the chain more easily. So it's more efficient. So less get lost. So there's less inflammation and it's more efficient energy transfer. So we get more water and more ATP because the proteins got pushed closer together. Because even just 1 angstrom closer together means 10 times better efficiency in the mitochondria. So it's not only nicotine that can do that. Cold thermogenesis does. So does melatonin. So they're better at it, but nicotine will still do that. Then the other thing that nicotine can do in the presence of, I think it has to be UV light, but we can make UV, is it really can raise NAD plus levels, because with NMR and nicotinamide riboside and NMN, there's loads of people that say, oh, I felt better on it, but it might have been a placebo, because there are lots and lots of studies on those. But, sometimes they say, oh, the level of NMN rose in the blood, but so what? It doesn't mean it got into this mitochondria and the Krebs cycle. And as much as David Sinclair's in the doghouse at the moment, because somebody's just made a big video about the resveratrol thing, he was correct about the pseudohypoxia and the NAD plus being important there, and that is aging. So when it comes to that pathway that ties into the sort of sirtuins, nicotine is the one that can actually raise NAD plus. To some extent, fasting and keto diets do, but it kind of tails off. And the same with nicotine. If you use it all the time, it'll turn nasty, and that's the problem. It's so addictive. If you get into it and then try and stop, it's like 3 weeks of being in a bad mood. Well, it is for me anyway, because I've tried all different sorts of nicotines, because I used to smoke, so that was my own fault. So I stopped, and this was in my 20s. But then the gum sort of kept sneaking back in, and I did notice, I feel different on the gum. And then I'd use it and then not notice it, and then I'd have to give up. So when it comes to getting this effect, you have to use something oral, so it'd have to be some kind of tablet. But then if you want to use Nicorette, they're full of titanium dioxide and sweeteners. Then you can buy those sort of inhalers, the thing that you put and suck in, but people can actually inhale it. But then you've got kind of interesting things like harpe, which is the Amazonian. I don't want to say snuff because it isn't actually snuff. It's sort of like a ground up mixture of all different plants from different tribes, and there's lots of different kinds of harpes, and that's got nicotine in it. So if people really wanted to try it, that's probably the most interesting of the nicotine, sort of, because there's more to the harpe because it's got other things in it, but it's sort of more powerful, but then it's more difficult to stop. So that's why it is a sort of snuff, because even though people think snuff doesn't exist anymore, it does in lots of countries, and it's like mega addictive, like worse than cigarettes. So that's the problem with nicotine. If you want to play with it, it's really, really easy to get addicted. The benefits, you have to have breaks from it because it'll taper off. But it is correct that it does do lots of interesting things. And I do think it's a really interesting molecule. I do use it sometimes, but then because I've smoked, I have to be really careful, because anybody else who's smoked or been addicted to vapes or gums knows that one bite and it starts up again. And people always say, oh no, it'll never happen to me, and then there they are stuck on the nicotine. So you have to have self-control over it. Or say a person who has never smoked in their life, this is back to sort of like what I was saying with the children getting addicted to rubbish early. The earlier you get addicted to something, the more it stays with you all through your life. So people who say did smoke and gave up like 20 years ago and wanted to try nicotine, they'd have to bear in mind it could easily set off all of that again. And it could even set off somebody smoking cigarettes again, because anybody who has smoked knows that they could have one cigarette at, say, a stag do or a party and then start again. That's happened to loads of my clients. So I do think it's really interesting, but like the more interesting and better some supplement is, the more caveats and side effects it comes with. Like peptides, I think, are fascinating, but then now you're getting into another category of grey area. Yeah, they do loads of things, but they're going to do loads of other weird things that we don't know about. And then I could go on for ages about all the really interesting things in bodybuilding, like even something like DNP that people think is the most dangerous slimming drug on the planet. That's a fascinating molecule for diabetes and cancer, but it's up here on the level of, if you get it wrong, you're going to cook yourself from the inside. So nicotine is obviously not like DMP, it's kind of down here, but it's one of those things, if you take the piss out of it, it'll really take the piss out of you. Whereas with other supplements and stuff, anything that's sort of not really that regulated, they don't really do much. And I think that's the same with all supplements. The ones that don't do much are just a waste of money. And then the more the effect you get from the supplement, the more the possible side effects, but then the more fun they are. And then, like you were saying, with people being selfish, I've got friends and all they want to do is have an 8-pack and go in a show, and I don't mind about that. So they're going to not care. They'll just say to me, oh, Sarah, can you just tell me about this and this supplement, what you think about this stack? And there's no point me saying, oh, well, there's probably loads of side effects and this might happen. They're not interested. They just want to be on that stage. So it's like the animal thing, that people are selfish sometimes and they just want to be better than everybody else. So back to what you were asking, definitely nicotine has lots of benefits, but I'm not advocating it anyway. I'm just saying, like, the addiction, you'll think, oh, it won't happen to me, and then boom, and you can't just take it all the time either. And how you take it matters. You have to have a clean kind. Like some of the chewing gums are just as bad as the Nicorettes because they've got sweeteners and whiteners and stuff. So that's the tricky part, is what you're going to use. And the patches, that's the wrong delivery form. It can't be transdermal. It has to be nasal or oral or some kind of inhalation. Definitely not a vape though, because goodness knows what all the propellants and flavorings and stuff in those do. We don't understand vapes really. So that's what I would say there.
You mentioned peptides there as well. That's another big area of hype. So it's the moment.
The peptides have been going for like 10 years, because before, in my youth, when I used to be much more interested in all of this, there was absolutely everything like we knew about, but there was no TikTok and no Instagram. So people just knew about all these, but it was very confined to a small group of people. So to me, I'm thinking, well, these peptides have been around, like the growth hormone releasing hormones and hexarelin and ipamorelin, they've been around for something like 40 years, and people think it's new, But in again, with those kind of peptide, that's to their advantage because they have been really quite well tested if you look in the literature. But yeah, the hype, I mean, there's so many now, and it scares me actually. I went and looked at my friend's peptide shop the other day, and there's like 3 times more peptides than there were last year. So yes, there's a new, I know what you mean. There's like, I think it's gone so crazy now. Some of them have never been tested really on anything.
What are your thoughts on BPC-157? Because obviously with growth hormone stimulating peptides, it's fairly easy to understand how even if the substance itself, the Ipamorelin, the CJC, whatever it is, even if the substance itself doesn't have any side effects, which of course everything does have some kind of side effect, it's easy to see how there can be potential side effects. If you spike your growth hormone release too high, there's going to be cascading effects from that. BPC-157 is kind of touted as a very clean and innocent peptide in the sense that all it does is cell regeneration and you don't get any side effects from it. I've got to admit, just to speak candidly, I've used BP-157 a lot for injuries and I found it to work wonders personally, and I haven't experienced any side effects. What are your thoughts on BPC-157?
All right. Yeah, no, just to be honest, yeah, I've tried all the peptides. So with BPC, I've found it's better. It does work. It depends on the type of injury, and it's actually can be really helpful for people who've got injured guts as well. And it's kind of say if I had somebody with lots of issues and they were desperate to try something and I was wary, but I knew they were never going to stop asking, that would be what I would choose. But I used it always with TB500, and that tend to work better. But then I'd also say to people, you need to have, if you want to repair yourself, you've got to have building blocks as well. So you can't just take the peptide and just think it's going to magically mend things. You've still got to do the actual correct rehabilitation for that particular area just to stimulate the movement, the sort of you can't just sit in the house and expect to be better. You've got to actually do something, and you've actually got to eat things to provide building blocks, and then it'll work even better. But they are one of those things that, sure, there are people who are that injured that they can't do those two things, and it helps them out of a hole. So it doesn't, I've had people, it doesn't get them better, but it was so bad, it's got them to a place where now they're not in pain anymore, and that's massive. So now they can start doing like more, and they're not as depressed. So they're thinking, oh, I'm not going to just drink whiskey every night and eat pizzas. They're like, oh, there is hope after all. And yeah, when it comes to side effects with those, like with the growth hormone releasing peptides, because it's always within physiological range, it's not like taking growth hormone where it could go any level, like through the ceiling. And yeah, that could cause sort of insulin resistance and acromegaly and all sorts. Whereas when it's just your pituitary gland having a kick up the bum, basically, it can only produce so much. And if you know when to do it, you can actually, that can actually be really helpful as well for people taking BPC, because I think it depends on how big the problem is. Because sometimes with people, if they are going to go down that route, I always think just do it properly. Don't just fiddle about with one peptide for a week and say it was rubbish. You've got to do it properly, and it probably will work really well. And the more you stack, as in the exercise, the way the diet, and maybe if 1 or 2 other peptides, the better it'll work. But for a very wary, frightened, cautious person, they can't really go wrong with that. But again, the placebo effect comes in because they don't really believe in it. It doesn't work quite as well always, but then sometimes it does. But then there are people it doesn't work for either, because it's not a magic cure. It's not like this molecule that just mends everything either, just to be sort of honest with people, because sometimes people listen to something and think, oh yeah, that's going to mend all my life's injuries, and it doesn't. But it maybe there's just a different peptide or something out there that will work for them.
Summer's on the way. We talked about winter in the UK, and some things that people might want to think about during winter. For summer, obviously, I can't believe there's still some controversy about whether we should be getting as much sun exposure as possible. But what I say to everyone is, we've lived under the sun forever. How the sun is literally our life source. How can the sun be bad for us? We should be getting as much sunlight as possible. From my perspective, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on that. But on that presumption that sun exposure is good for us, with summer coming up, What advice do you have for people who want to up their sun exposure but are perhaps quite fair-skinned and feel as though they need sunscreen? And what are your thoughts on using sunscreen? Should people be using that? And if they shouldn't be using that, what should they be doing to build their solar callus?
Okay, so just quickly with the sunscreens, if you block UV, first of all, that's terrible because you're going to disturb your dopamine, your thyroid production, your melatonin, your alpha MSH, which makes melanin and regulates your appetite. And it also, enkephalins and endorphins are UV active. And also, if you block the UVB, you can't make vitamin D properly. And low vitamin D is a massive cancer risk, along with all sorts of other kind of other hormone problems, appetite problems, not so much bone problems. It's not that bad anymore. And then the other problem with sunscreen is when you block the UV, the skin concentrates the blue and the violet light more, and that UV doesn't penetrate really. I mean, it does maybe a millimeter or so, but the blue and the cyan can get in maybe like a centimeter or so more. So what happens then is it concentrates that light from the sun because you blocked the UV, and then you could just get a different problem of like basal cell carcinoma risk rather than a melanoma. Because the problem with melanoma is, yes, UV can cause skin cancer, but that's because of people being in blue light all the time, as in they sit in front of a screen with all the windows shut, and they've blocked the UV and the near infrared, and they've done that for years, and then they rush out and go to Mallorca and burn and get a melanoma. So it's not the fact they got burnt in Mallorca that caused it. It was the sitting inside that was, it was kind of pulled the bow per se, and then the arrow got let go when they went to Mallorca and burnt. So first of all, for getting ready, the UVB is back now in the UK, but this comes back to solar callus and about seeing the sunrise. So seeing the sunrise is resetting all the clocks in your body, and the clocks go out of sync throughout the day, no matter how diligent you are. It's just biology. So you need to reset them every morning. And so this is not just for sleeping. All of your organs have a clock, and if your gut clock's off, you'll get gut problems. And if your liver clock's off, it won't detox properly. And then if you've got cell clocks, and that's cells knowing whether they should live or die. So we want them to be accurate. And then genes have got clocks, and the mitochondria are all tied into this. So they need to know what time it is so they can burn fat or store fat or whatever you need. So the clock thing is way deeper than just sort of being able to get to sleep. So if you go out and see the sunrise, that's safe for everybody because the violet coloured light and the red light that's out is really healing. So if people have got problems of any kind, eye problems, skin problems, mental health problems, pain problems, it's safe for everybody. Babies can go out at sunrises, everybody can. So that sort of gets your, that kind of red light gets your skin ready, because later after that becomes the UVA rise. So again, people can go out in that. So it's about an hour after sunrise, and then get like a graded exposure to the UVA. And ideally you want to get it all over your body. So I'll still find ways to be naked even in the middle of winter. It's not particularly populated here, but there's still a risk of being discovered. So the more skin you show to the sun, the better. So that's my advice, is to start now, because if you've booked your summer holiday, so say to somewhere like Rhodes, which can be crazily hot, if you hadn't basically exposed your skin to the sunrise and the sort of early morning sun, the UVA, you can still go out and get a little bit of UVB now because it's just come back. But that's enough to get you ready so that when you went somewhere where there is a lot of like solar yield, I mean, some people might be going to Mexico or something that's crazy amount of sun. You can enjoy your holiday more, get more benefits, and it's safer. So that's sort of my view on how it works. And there's never enough, no matter what, if in doubt, just go outside in the sun. That's what I think. If you've had a bad day or upset, just go outside.
Absolutely. I think it goes back to what you've been alluding to throughout this whole conversation, which is that it's all connected, the physical, the mental, and the spiritual, if you want to include that, if you acknowledge that or define it as that. So much can be fixed from us going outside, and the issue of sun exposure people that, are worried about skin cancer, that burn very easily, a lot of it can be traced back to the fact that we're not exposing ourselves to our natural environment in the ways that we should be, in the way that our bodies and our brains want us to. In the winter, we're not exposing ourselves enough to the cold enough because we're sitting inside with the central heating on. And then in summer, when we everyone throughout winter in this country moans about how dreary and depressing it is, and then summer comes around and everyone's still sat inside, not even enjoying the sun. I know it's difficult. When people have jobs, of course, I get that it's difficult, but yeah, I think that's a really good actionable protocol. If people can get up, obviously it's difficult in the peak of summer, but get up early enough to watch the sunrise, that's going to have so many beneficial effects that cascade throughout the day. And it's a safe time for everyone to be in the sun, regardless of how sensitive their skin may be to it. And obviously you've got the whole, all the benefits regarding circadian rhythms and that kind of thing. To finish off the discussion today, I mentioned to you before we started about long COVID. A lot of people may not know what long COVID is. So I suppose maybe if you could give a kind of brief introduction as to what it is and what anyone who is suffering long-term effects from COVID can do to help themselves, because this is an area that really is new. It's only, at most it's 4 years old, and there's very little help the NHS can give on it because of how new it is, and they're a very slow-moving body, in my opinion. So what advice do you have for people that are suffering from long-term complications from COVID?
Okay, so first of all, I've got no idea what COVID is. However, I just work with the person, because that there are lots and lots of reasons of why certain people react to something. And sometimes the only way to approach it is sort of just do what you know, as in, we all know the better you sleep, the better you can detox and heal from whatever something might be. So it would be fundamentally just making the bedroom sacred and taking all the tech out, making sure it's dark. If you've got the money, invest in something like a Magnetico, because that's a giant magnet, and magnetism is really important for removing toxins. And first thing would be making sure that your sleeping time is sacred. And even if you love watching Netflix and TV, you just need to be off the screens for like for those people, probably 3 hours or two, at minimum, before bed, and really honor the darkness, because we can do a lot of healing in the dark, and it might be boring, but it's easier now because the clocks are about to change. So it's, you've got more natural light in the evening. But I would still definitely say really honor and make your sleep sacred and let your body do what it needs to do. The other thing is red light therapy can be helpful in this situation, because it helps the mitochondria. The ATPase will spin without food electrons under the red light, and also it can help expand your water battery. But then you can go outside and get exactly the same effect, and you can do that for longer. But there are people who found red light therapy to be helpful. Some people will say that methylene blue and red light help them, but on the other hand, methylene blue is a bit like nicotine, but a bit higher up in this could go horribly wrong if you have X, Y, and Z conditions. However, for some people, they don't care because the long COVID is so bad and they want to try anything. So methylene blue and red light panels, not just any old panel off Amazon. You need to buy a proper panel from a proper company that's got the right flicker rate, the right power, the right wavelength, low non-native EMFs. And again, like I was saying, just getting the technology out of the bedroom and away from tech in the evening so you can sleep. We can never do enough grounding. So I always wear grounding shoes, and I've got like about 10 pairs now in the house, because like everything, half of them are rubbish. So it's been a big mission. So again, just something simple like grounding. I went through a phase of telling people to do at least half an hour of barefoot walking somewhere every day. I appreciate not everybody lives near like beach or whatever, or has that ability, but everybody can buy grounding shoes. When it comes to sort of fasting, which we haven't talked about, I know that some people, and the mechanism of this is that sometimes with a long COVID, some aspect of whatever that is has got stuck in the mitochondria, and the only way to deal with this is to do sort of water fasts and actually kill off the mitochondria that have got something stuck in them. Because with mitochondria, it's a bit like classic cars and old cars, that we want the old bangers off the road because they pollute the city, and and they don't go very fast and use loads of petrol. It's the same with mitochondria. You want those out, and your body will just make new ones. And sometimes these old mitochondria that have got something in them from the long COVID, they're hanging on and just creating inflammation and creating a problem. So for some people, a sort of extended water fast can be helpful to kill those off. And with these protocols, that there are so many different approaches, because, like I said right at the beginning, I don't know what it is, and also, sometimes you want to sort of look through your daily life and lifestyle, because no matter what, including me, if somebody looked at it, there's always stuff I can do better that I think is not important, whereas it is. So again, with people with the other aspect of COVID, too much technology can actually make it all worse as well. So you have to start to be sort of more vigilant about things. Luckily, the phone is the worst of all. It's worse than Wi-Fi in airports. If you live by a phone tower, then obviously move if you can, but the phone is worse. But luckily, it's like food. Really, we control all of our phone use. And yes, I appreciate people have to use it for business, but not always. And even me, who has to use it for business, I know that I look at other things on it, and I could easily have rung somebody or just emailed them, but I use the phone. So it's just sort of stuff like that. Then all of the things we've talked about. I'm a massive fan of cold thermogenesis, because I actually went swimming in the lake this morning at 6:30, and I haven't done it for a while because it's just been too cold. It would have been too dangerous. So implementing cold thermogenesis, so people don't need to go out and swim in a lake at 6:30. They can start, like you said, by opening the windows, turning the heating down or off. They can cold showers are all right, but a cold bath with ice in it, everybody can make one of those and go in it when they've come out of the bath or the shower, rather than just drying it with a towel. Walk around a bit naked and let the air dry in the air. So there's lots and lots and lots of cold thermogenesis that people can do. It doesn't have to be a lake or buying a cold plunge tub and making it 5 degrees yet, because that can actually make it worse because it's too much of a shock. But generally, viruses and things, Dr. Tom Cowan would go mad hearing me saying this, because he says they don't exist, and I'm still getting my head around, because I did his course. And I'm not, I'm just in that moment of, when you're just working it out. Whatever he thinks, viruses and creatures and mold and parasites don't like deuterium, so that's the other route people can take. You can deplete deuterium by avoiding carbs and sugar and using a keto diet. I'm not against the deuterium depleted water at all. I think it's really helpful if somebody's ill. That's a route that people can look into, because in general, the less deuterium you have, the more unattractive you are to any kind of small organism. And then cold thermogenesis actually depletes deuterium as well. So do saunas, because of the sweating. And then also with the cold, there are other sort of benefits, because sometimes it's mental health as well with long COVID. So the cold is really good for neurotransmitters like dopamine and noradrenaline, because sometimes we can fall into the trap of becoming too attached or labeled to our situation. So this is again looping back to the spirituality thing, not just Joe Dispenza's work, but other things of like seeing yourself better, seeing it gone, not sort of reading about it too much as well, because that can make people worse. So there's lots of things that people can, physics ways. I have seen different protocols and stuff online using compounds, but you can't really say that on a podcast because I've never tried them, and also have to make sure people are kept safe.
Yeah, again, a really good important point. That being, again, mental, physical, spiritual, it's all connected. And really, I like to think that I live a healthy lifestyle. As you said, I'm not perfect. You'll see me at the McDonald's drive-through sometimes, which I am absolutely ashamed of, but it happens. But the healthy lifestyle I live, it is for physical health, but really it's for mental health first. It's for, my cognitive function, how I think, spiritually, I'm a very spiritual person, how I feel on a spiritual and mental level. And I think physical protocols, you've got to have your physical health in check. Because if you don't feel physically good, if you're not in good physical working order, how can you interact with the world mentally and even spiritually if you haven't got, if you're not functioning how you should? The physical world, that's how we interact with this existence we find ourselves in. So you've got to have your physical health in order if you want to have good mental health, and if you want to be spiritually thriving, emotionally thriving, however you want to put it. So yeah, just a quote that's come to mind. I can't remember who to attribute it to, but somebody said, trying to think your way out of overthinking, trying to think your way out of anxiety is like trying to sniff your way out of a cocaine addiction. Which is like a really good way of illustrating that if you're struggling mentally, if you have mental issues, oftentimes, like you said, if you try and read and think your way out of it, that can be very difficult. The best action oftentimes is action, to implement physical protocols, which are not just going to help you physically, but they're going to help you mentally, because it's all interlinked.
Yeah, definitely. And also with anxiety and depression, like we've all had it. And sometimes it's just your body telling you you're doing something it doesn't like. And some people get pain if the mother-in-law is coming over, the bad knee starts for some reason. Other people, it's anxiety, sometimes it can be a food, sometimes it's bad circadian rhythms. There can be all sorts of things. And it's definitely, and trying to analyze it in your life and, oh, I'm a bad person, or what if this happens? Sometimes that isn't what, it's nothing to do with that. It can be the most random thing that sets off people's pain or depression or anxiety. And it's just your body or your mitochondria or your gut microbiome trying to get your attention to tell you you're doing something that it's not good for the rest of the organism. So yeah, there's a lot to it. And I'm not saying I don't, I think it's really important, to help people with long COVID, as it is with any sort of illness. But then when people are really attached to my illness or my bipolar or my medication, I'm not as patient, because I sometimes think I can't help you because it's become part of your identity. There's so much we could talk to about spirituality, and because I've found spirituality massively helpful I'm into anything from the Kabbalah to Sufism or whatever. There's something, no matter what you are religion wise, even an atheist, there's something out there that you'll find really mind blowing spiritually. And it's all the same anyway. When you've done, you think it's going to be 20 different routes to source or God. And when you've looked down lots of them, you think, oh, actually, hang on a minute, this is all just the same. But it can be massively helpful, and it's definitely something. And also, I think the people who benefit the most from, say, something like spirituality would be a really left-brained skeptical person, because they have to do something totally different. Like somebody who'd been vegan for 20 years, they're going to really benefit from going carnivore, whereas somebody like me probably wouldn't notice the massive changes. So sometimes doing the thing that you really don't want to do, that's what's going to help you the most, like the sort of the polarities and the dualities that we have.
Yeah, another quote: the magic you're looking for is in the work you're avoiding, or something like that.
Yes, yeah, there's loads of, yes, yeah, it is. I mean, there's all sorts of things, and I think, and I always think there's lots, not to give up either, because there's truth and help in every discipline, for neurology, from movement to nutrition. As much as I am not a fan of supplements, I still think there are biochemical things that can be really helpful. And you've got light, magnetism, water, and not to give up hope, and don't just keep looking in one rabbit hole like the other one. The definition of insanity is just doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. And that's what some people do with illness. I'm like, look, you've tried 55 diets already and it's not working. It's probably not the food.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, thank you for everything you've shared today. It's been massively helpful for myself. I think anyone listening can take away a great deal of actionable advice. If people want to hear more of what you've got to say, want to consume your content, or get in contact with you, where can they go?
I'm Busy Superhuman on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. I've just made a Substack, which I'm going to populate. And that's where you can find my content. I do work with people, and I do have a members coaching group, but I've got loads and loads of free stuff as well. So there's all sorts out there for people to look at. And the TikTok tends to be the more simple, shorter stuff. YouTube is a mixture of interviews and explainer videos, and some of the Instagram actually, the reels are simple, but some of the posts can go sort of very deep into a rabbit hole. So there's something for people who are just, new to this, and other people who are sort of really into, who know more about Jack Kruse than Jack Kruse himself. So there's all different sort of offerings, as we would say.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.